Hello and welcome to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at the games from the past and talk about their impact and relevance today. I am Tim Longo Jr., and I'm joined, as always, by a man who never thought he would want to build a spaceship to escape Earth so badly as now.
Brett Duville. Yes, I want to get away from these ruthless civilizations that plague my planetary surface.
Yeah, it's just maybe that intro is more for me than you, but I've been so focused on the spaceship
accurate
science battle. But it is just such
for weeks. I've been threatening to play more, and you know what hasn't happened? Started another game. No, okay. Have had no. It's just not my game. I mean, I totally appreciate the game. It's got a lot of interesting lessons to teach, and it's a lot of value, and I just don't like playing it.
Yeah. No. I mean, you've mentioned that, and I get it. I can totally get it. And as we talked about, I mean, that was me. That wasn't necessarily as much me not liking the game, because clearly I'll talk about that's not the case. But it was me more bouncing off because it is such a specific kind of game, such a specific genre, and it is so time consuming and opaque and, seemingly complex and blah, blah, blah. So I would bounce off of them every time one would come out that I would get. But, now that I think I texted you late at night after I finally won in Civ 3. But now that I've spent so much time with it, with specifically Civ 3, like, you can see how it is such a specific thing, and just it's not going to be for everybody. But I was having a conversation, actually, and a complete non sequitur here a little bit, but related. I was having a conversation with a friend who used to work at Telltale, and they were talking about sort of how we were talking about Telltale's sort of demise, blah blah blah, about that. And he was saying how they eventually realize that adventure games do have a ceiling when it comes to a specific kind of game, when it comes to the audience number. They found that ceiling. They did a really good job at achieving that. But that ceiling didn't really expand, so they were trying to find different things to do to expand their audience, etc. And so they had a captivated, audience. It just never got bigger. And I feel like that's probably the case with Civilization as a franchise. It is, they have a group of people that love it. And I will talk a little bit about probably more of this in the next episode or bonus episode, because I also played quite a bit of Civ 5 after finishing Civ 3. And it's just so interesting to me how similar, I mean, they're the same game. Like, it is almost 10 years later that Civ 5 comes out from Civ 3, and the underpinnings, the structure of at least Civ 3 and 5 are almost the same. There's additions and et cetera, and there's things that have been refined, of course, but as if I were to imagine myself as a fan who's played from the beginning, or like maybe got in on 2 or 3 and keep playing. 4, I think, was a big entry point for people. 2, there's this familiarity with it, right? Where you get into this rhythm. The early game's very similar to, and I can just see if, they have that group of people. And if you're not in that group, that's okay. But right. I think that people are obsessed, with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think strategy games in general are a whole thing. I mean, it is a historical genre on the PC, right? Because it was a thing that PCs were pretty good for at the time, right? I mean, even going back to the Apple II era, you had strategy games, Ancient Art of War, for example, something like that. I think that was an Apple II game.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's a kind of a natural for turn-based games, because at the time we were a lot more patient with it taking as long as it takes. I mean, to play chess on the Apple II, you expect it's going to churn for a minute and try to figure out what it wants to do. Even on the even on the sort of lowest difficulty settings. And you kind of expect that. And also maybe as a person who plays board games, you might expect that anyway. I mean, certainly as a person who played chess, I expected that it's not instantaneous, that the person I'm playing against is done, right? So there's just kind of a rhythm and stuff that this genre has, and that people have expectations of it, and it's been there for a long time, which I think also leads to sort of that sort of complexity, and people sort of, there's a group of people who just get it. They sit down and play a strategy game. Like I listened to Rob Zacny talk about it on Waypoint or 3 Moves Ahead. Yeah. And it's like, a lot of it's just Greek to me, but he'll describe, well, this happens and then this happens. And he's telling it at this narrative level. Yeah. Right. Which is a thing that I do really appreciate it about. We talked about your World War situation a week ago. Mm-hmm. I love hearing those stories, but I don't actually enjoy trying to get them out of there. And, of course, this time I also had the additional and I had the most boring game that you could have. I had my one moment early on where I eliminated a civ, and then nothing happened, for hundreds of years. So yeah, it's been very, very interesting. And yeah, I just couldn't bring myself to start another game. I had all this time to do so, and well, I'm just not in that group, I guess, anymore. Just funny. No. Yeah. And
I don't blame you. I mean, to be honest, specifically, which I'll get into a little bit in a second, specifically with Civ 3. So what I ended up doing, to contrast what you did since the last one, so we talk about on the podcast from time to time how one or the two of us will usually, actually, I don't think it's ever been the case that we've gone down the same hole. I can't think of one that's happened, but for me, for instance, like Breath of the Wild, I went down, after we did that bonus episode, I went pretty deep, 200 hours deep there. Prey, so it doesn't happen to me very often, but you have your Kingdom Hearts, and etc. Those occasionally happen. But for me, it was Civ. I didn't anticipate it. I didn't see it coming, but it happened.
You didn't want this?
I didn't want it. Well, so in retrospect, I think I probably subconsciously did want it. I think this is a franchise and a genre that I've always wanted to play more of and thought that I would like. Because for me, and this is probably not the best description of this game and this genre for various reasons, but this is sort of like OCD the game to me. And I love order, and I love trying to achieve order, and kind of Brett's going to laugh because he's worked with me many times. I love the micromanaging of things and getting into the details and just fine tuning all the knobs and squeezing all of the juice out of anything, you know what I mean? And this game is built for that mentality, for me at least. And so I always had this tickle that I knew, this itch that this would scratch. But I never devoted the time, and I never had a real, and the podcast gave me a reason to go deep. And so I set a goal for Civ 3 specifically to, I wanted to win with the science victory. That was my goal, because I knew that, I wasn't going to have enough time to play multiple types of victories. That was the one that was most interesting to me. Because it was so specific, because
that's the space race, right?
Yeah, for those who don't know, right. Yeah, you have to build the Apollo program Wonder, and once you do that unlocks the ability to make the different components of the spaceship, which you make sort of like units, and then you just make those in your cities, and then once you make all of them, you combine them to make the spaceship, and then you leave the planet. Hence my intro, which I just thought was so funny, because it's depending on the state of your particular civilization game, in my case, it was I orchestrated it in such a way where it wasn't a high conflict world. Everyone was generally getting along, and there was a lot of diplomacy happening, not a lot of backstabbing. And so when I left the planet, it was sort of like, why am I leaving?
It's kind of a happy place. Why am I leaving?
Yeah, it was just because I set a goal for myself to do it. I was like, well, this is how I'm going to win, And so there are times when sim games like this don't, the cognitive dissonance of that doesn't work. But anyway, yeah, it was a nice tranquil planet that I left.
I think also, right, that's been a model. I think there's been a space race victory forever. I mean, I think that's been in the series for a while. Like, I think
for 1 or 2, you mean?
I think it may go back. I don't know that. If anybody knows, I mean, let me know if that's not accurate. But I think that comes from a very similar sort of, I don't know, techno egalitarian whatever mindset that I think is kind of behind a lot of the tech tree and things like that are in this game. I think the idea that the goal of man is to get to the stars is definitely comes from it's a statement, and it's definitely a certain strain of like, our end. I mean, it's people who love Star Trek or whatever. I mean, and I love Star Trek. I at the same time, I don't think our goal is to get to the stars. I think that's a great fantasy. And I don't know if we ever develop a, faster than light technology, then by all means, but until then, I think we're stuck on this one rock. Even beyond. And it's not important to talk about that right now, but I do think that there is a sort of looking to the stars as thinking of that as the next big frontier. We've crossed every frontier we have on Earth, so we've got to go to the the one place we haven't been that's really, really big, and that's just a natural tendency, regardless of whether it makes any sense that in order to be able to achieve it, you'd have to have a world where it's okay to be, you can get away with it, basically, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of an interesting. Yeah, I didn't expect that because I mean, I think that I probably could have achieved that victory with my civilization too, because I had no conflict.
Yeah, you were dominating. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just isolated, and I had boats patrolling the waters all over the place. I could have built, I guess at a certain point, I could have built the fighter planes and just had them patrolling as well, just to have them do it, because I think you can do that. You can set the planes on patrol routes. Or make them patrol a little area or something like that. I could see it in the options of things that you could do. I just was at that point just trying to see if I could destroy everything before the clock ran out. I got pretty close.
Right.
So I think it would have been possible for me to achieve. And it makes me curious now. Like, could I do that? I'm not going to go do that, but could I? Well, I see how it happens,
Well, yeah, and it's possible that maybe various victory conditions you could have achieved at that state, right? Because you had so much dominance.
Yeah.
So there is a point when you're doing so well that it does seem like you can kind of choose your path of victory. You don't have to plan like I did. For me, so what I did was I ended up playing total, including the first game that I talked about already last couple episodes, 4 more full games.
That's a lot.
And what's that?
That's a lot.
It is. Although, once you get to know the game better, and I turned certain settings off to speed things up, like I turned animations off and stuff. Like I really like I said, squeeze the juice out of this, and kind of really wrung it out.
Yeah.
To make sure that that it was I was the most efficient and surgical about my goal. So once you do that, a full game was probably 3 hours or so.
Oh, that's not bad.
Yeah, so it's not as terrifying as you think from our first experiences, where it just kind of drags on. Now the first 3 of those extra 4 I did lose though, and one of the times, because I don't know the game, I don't know the franchise that well, and if you're a returnee, then you would probably think about this stuff. But like one of those times was an accidental loss in that, not really accidental, but I just didn't know that how the diplomacy victory would work. And, unless you're doing a lot of espionage where you're checking up on your, all the other civilizations, you don't really know what's going on. Espionage basically is just like, it's like the information fog of war, right? You're just revealing things. It's just information you're trying to find out, right? That's all espionage really is. You can steal stuff, but it's a lot of it is like figuring out what the other AI are doing. I'd probably be very effective and important in a multiplayer situation. But once you build the United Nations wonder, instantly everyone just votes, and whoever gets the most votes wins. So it's
wow. Yeah.
And I didn't know they were building it, right? So because I wasn't doing espionage so much where I could figure that out, and I should have been paying attention. So I was 500 plus turns in, right? And I'm like, I'm on the track. I think I'm going to make it. And then all of a sudden game over, and I had no idea. Yeah. And so,
so what do you do about that?
You mean, how do I prevent that from happening?
Yeah.
The next time? Well, my tactic was both speed and trying to do a little more espionage so I could figure out where people were, but largely it was out tech them, and beat them to my win condition before they got there, which created what's that?
No, I just said okay. All right, I could see that. Yeah.
Well, and I guess, others who are fans of the franchise probably are answering your question themselves. I can imagine, if you do enough espionage and figure out what state people are in, because it does tell you like what wonders people are building, right? So you can see kind of where in the tech tree they've potentially gotten to, and you can look and see where United Nations is, right? So if they're in this era, this age, and they've most recently built this, this previous wonder to the United Nations, and they might be close. And then you can be aggressive and take them out, or take out the city that's building it or something, But it is really just kind of a race, quite literally in that regard. So, but the funny thing that what I ended up doing with those three games is I was continually kind of like refining my play style and my setup. It felt almost like a puzzle to me, because what I started to do was really get into the nitty gritty on the economics, how to maximize my civilization and my cities, cash output, so I could speed up certain things and use the money for certain things. And then the other interesting thing that was unexpected and weird for me is when I'm choosing what to, because basically I want to get to that Apollo program wonder as quickly as possible, right? So rather than what I would usually do in sort of my usual play style, which we talk a lot about on the podcast, I'm fairly completionist in a lot of ways. Rather than filling out every age with every tech that's in that age, I'm skipping stuff. So the time I got the most successful, and I'll say why I ultimately didn't technically ever win, because I made a mistake in the sort of UI, but where I was about to win, I still had dirt roads and I was building the spaceship. Because I had skipped.
That's Florida, man. No, I'm just kidding. Sorry, Lord, listeners from Florida. I'm just being funny.
Yeah, Canaveral. But it is just a perfect example of I'm beelining my way, skipping tech that I don't absolutely need to race to that, to that. And it's because I set this arbitrary goal for myself, right? And so it was just hilarious to see my civilization, because I had no railroads, I forget, there were some other funny examples. It was probably my units too, right? All my units were primarily still, old school. I skipped horses altogether, things like that.
Wow.
Because if you're speeding enough toward that technical future, in something like horses isn't actually, unless you get into conflict along the way where they have dominance, horses aren't actually that valuable, because by the time you get there, you're making mechanized units anyway. You know what I mean?
Right.
So you kind of are planning things to skip. So it was just fascinating to me to see like how the game adapts to that and how crazy of a simulation it really can be when you're, I don't want to say breaking it, is bending it to do a certain thing, you know? So I got to this point of optimization. And I by no means became an expert in 5 games, but I did feel like I was improving with each game. The fatal error that I made though is because what I did not know, I never figured out a way to optimize my game to win in 100 or 540 turns, which is the default. I couldn't figure out how to go that quickly. I just am not that good at a game, but you can go in and customize that and up it. So I did make it the max of 1,000 turns. So I wouldn't, because basically time would run out, right? And then it's just whoever has the highest points.
I mean, that's what happened with my domination victory. As I was maybe 5 turns away from victory, complete, total, everybody's gone victory, I just ran out of turns at 540.
Right, but you had the most points anyway, right? So
I was far ahead on points, and I had the most landmass, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, I was most advanced in every way. Actually, there was no. Unless they had done something like build a wonder out from under me, there was no way I could lose that game.
Yeah. So, but the problem, the fatal error I made is when that last game, I had forgotten to up the turn count. So
oh no,
I had remembered for the rest of them. And so I was literally building like the second to last piece of the spaceship, and I was clearly going to win. Like nobody was even close. But then I ran out of turns. So I did win technically because I had the highest points, but I didn't get to launch my spaceship. Which the spaceship, the UI is actually pretty cool. They actually show a kind of a 3D render of the spaceship, and as you're building the parts, like the parts kind of like, show up on the ship. And then there's literally a button that says launch. But I did
That's
that.
Hilarious.
I did not get to press.
You've got to keep playing then. I mean,
no. Well, I'd have to start. I'd have to start a 5th game because I would need to up the turn count.
Oh, I know.
To 1,000.
I mean, how can you?
Well,
you're not going to be able to sleep without doing that.
Well, so my solution was to play Civ 5, in which I did get that.
Oh my goodness!
I did that yesterday.
So you went all the way down the rabbit hole, and then you're like, you know what I need? I need to dig a second rabbit hole.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. I found another offshoot tunnel of the rabbit hole, but I did launch a ship in 5, which was very fulfilling. I feel like I achieved my goal. But that's for another episode, maybe. So I went down deep, and I think
now through all of this, were you feeling the one more turn stuff?
Oh my goodness, it was not good. Like, if I didn't have some vague excuse to tell Jen that I was just needing to play for the podcast,
wow,
I would have been in, because it's just, I don't understand.
I'm going to clip this audio and send it to her and say, hey, new ringtone.
I just don't understand where the time goes. Like,
yeah.
It's, and then especially once I kind of optimize the sort of extraneous, animations and things where like the game is just, I don't want to say playing itself, but you know what I mean? It's like I'm setting things up, I'm hitting spacebar a lot, and I'm just like barnstorming through. It just never stops. You never want to stop.
Right. Yeah, and that's interesting actually, because I think that what happens there is, I mean, this is a thing that I think we could talk about with a lot of games, but this game definitely has it of sort of setting your own goals. Yeah. And when you can set these goals there, I mean, you're setting a goal that is the whole length of the game. So you're really doing lots of little individual steps like you've been talking about that are like, okay, I need to get through this era quickly. What's the optimal way to do that? Let me focus on that, make sure this city is building that, and we've got taxes high enough, whatever, so we can speed the research along, yada, yada, yada. Like I can totally see the churn, the mental churn, and the intermediate goals that you think at least will add to that final goal that you're trying to achieve, right? And that's how games get you, right? Yeah. I mean, that's how Skyrim gets you, right? Is oh, I saw a thing on the little, on the map. So I went and, oh, there was a little quest thing at the outside. And then it's like, now I'm into this dungeon hole. Then I came out and there's a thing that takes me to this other place. And it's just like, you've constantly got and you're like, and you know what? I'm almost there. I've almost got my daggers to 40. So I'll have the double it, whatever. It's just like constantly another thing. Mm-hmm. And here you've got this long-term goal that is easily, like I say, you can easily break that up into sub goals. This is programming, and that's why I don't play these games.
Right. It is
because it's not serendipitous. Like, I mean, that's the difference sort of with Skyrim. Skyrim is kind of accidental. You make your own goals, but they kind of happen to you as well. And you're sort of picking from a palette of things that you want to do at any given time. Whereas here it's like, well, it's the board game, right? You only have so many. I mean, the board changes a little bit every time and the, initial conditions or whatever. But fundamentally, like you said, you see the engine work and how it works, the economic engine and all of the stuff. And the tech tree, if the tech tree changed or if you had to discover the tech tree, like it would become a different game.
Yeah. And there'll be some discussion, I think, when we play for the bonus episode about that, ways that they try to instill some of that, which I'll talk about next time. But because it applies to both 5 and Beyond Earth. Because they definitely, I think they probably saw the flaws in 3, 1, 2, and 3. And it's been so long since I played any of 4. I would say that, maybe some of them are there too. But it's very interesting because basically, like I said, the time difference between 3 and 5 is basically 10 years. And so it's very interesting to see how fundamentally the same game, what decisions they're making, to improve upon those sorts of, I don't want to say rote, but like you said, it's very systematic. It's very like by the numbers, and no pun intended, but by the numbers, in a way, once you know how kind of all the systems work. Now, my prediction, I only upped for those extra games I played, I only upped the difficulty by 1. But my prediction is, I would hope at least, that if you're going up pretty high on the difficulty, that some of the unexpected moments that might happen from what the AI chooses to do, because for the most part, like I said, I had a pretty tranquil, I was still pretty low difficulty, but I had a tranquil world. So there was a lot of cordial, a few battles here and there, but a lot of cordial diplomacy happening. But I orchestrated that on purpose to make sure that I had a clear runway to make the spacecraft. You know what I mean? So everything I did was for that goal. And it was cool to know that the game essentially supported me in doing that. So yeah, to your point, I made that, it's just like you said, whether it's a Skyrim or a Fallout or something, you see that the proverbial mountain and you're like, I'm going to go to the top of that, things are going to happen along the way and, unexpected, but whatever. Maybe you don't have the skill you need to do that. So you go and offshoot to go do some side stuff to get that skill or whatever. So it's very, when you break it down to its fundamental levels, all games are the same.
They're all the same. Yeah. It's what they say. That's what Tolstoy said, right? All good games are the same. All bad games are different in their own way.
Is that what he said?
I think it was Tolstoy about happy families, or maybe that was Dostoevsky. I can't remember now.
No, I'm not going to be able to help you there. But it
was Karamazov, so it was Dostoevsky.
It just was very. It was funny to. I feel like maybe this isn't the case because I know they want you. You hear people talk about both developers of Civ and players. How the end game engine, the game design sort of engine behind it is very much about play the way you want to play. You know what I mean? And it's meant to be able to support what I did. The weird thing for me though, when I played those extra games with this one single focus, is I felt like I wasn't playing it right. You know what I mean? And when I'm to add some extra detail to that, like I was also skipping certain buildings in towns, in cities, because they weren't necessary, and they were, but when you play it just to play it, like for fun, and you're just going to see what happens, a temple, for instance, has an inherent value. Like, I basically built a civilization of very unhappy people who were very industrious and loved science, and that was it, and could make a lot of money. So like
America.
Yeah, maybe, and I felt bad.
While I'm here, I was right. It was Tolstoy. It was actually Karenina. It's not Karamazov. Sorry for the error. I regret the error.
I'm glad that we avoid the letters from that correction. I just felt bad in a way that I was sort of, I had this kind of terrible civilization.
Because that you were a mad scientist, that you made all your people unhappy to pursue your scientific goals.
Yeah, to get off the planet. Which is so weird because it was a perfectly fine planet. It seemed like everything was fine.
Nicely done, Elon.
Yeah, right, exactly. Space. That was my SpaceX.
Yeah.
And I still had my dirt roads and no religion and
wow.
And but I was heading for the stars. I just been so that was my
What civ were you? So what was your city named? I'm curious that your spaceport was going to be out of.
So let's see, that the one that I was the last one, I think I was Greek, because it wasn't for any reason other than to optimize, because the Greeks have an advantage in science and industry.
Oh,
or no?
So not only that, you chose how the game was set up.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
No, I didn't do random. I chose mine. I let the other civs be random.
Okay.
Landmass and stuff, but my civ I chose because I was also fooling with the turn amount and stuff like that.
Sure. Yeah.
But no,
that makes sense. No, that makes sense.
I chose the one that was the best for, in my head at least, the best for that purpose. There was a point, I think I fooled around with a couple different ones. The other one was Germany because they are science and military. And I thought, well, it'd be good to have a military advantage if I'm defending myself while I'm trying to get off the planet. It's so weird. Because basically all of my cities just had like marketplaces and banks and things to make money, and then libraries and universities, and then that's it.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a civilization you built, sir.
Yeah, but that's what the game allows.
Yeah, that's what allows. Yeah, I mean, I do really appreciate that. That sort of, I've talked about Dominion a lot in this number of episodes, but it's like playing that game where you've got these, 10 cards you've chosen out of 25, and for us, it's out of hundreds of cards because we have like 10 expansions. So we've got a lot of games that we could play of Dominion. And one of the things you find yourself doing is you look at the cards you've got and you're like, I wonder if I could do this. What if I just bought this until the mid game and then switched to that, right? And so you're like trying to maximize whatever. Like I want to have a million of actions, or I want to generate tons and tons of gold. I'm just going to chase that one thing. And you can end up with these really weird decks where it's like every time you draw a handful of cards, you get one victory card and 4 money, and you just always have lots of money. Mm-hmm. And that can lead to real victory, but it could clog your deck, right? It could end up being a real problem. That could happen to you. It could have clogged you. If you had a civ that was next to you that saw a lot of easy wins, like, oh look, it's a bunch of librarians and university professors, we could take that city. You might have had
and
that's why I have that trouble
to the Germans, so I could defend myself if that happens, because it was just so funny, right? That I was so focused on this thing and ignoring the rest of society, at all costs. And you mentioned Elon, and it's like there are moments when you're like, wow, it's the Jurassic Park problem, right? It's like we're so worried whether we could do something, we don't think about whether we should. And I did that. That's what I did. Oh, and the other detail that I loved, not only did I have dirt roads and like no infrastructure in my cities other than making science. It also was, I was building a rocket in 1890.
I played that game. That was Ultima Dreams, Martian Dreams.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah.
Worlds of Ultima.
Right. It was a steampunk. I was building a steampunk rocket.
You were going to send Nellie Bly and Sigmund Freud, and that's amazing. So that's really good.
It created a funny story, an interesting.
Jules Verne was your lead scientist.
Yeah.
Or H.G. Wells or something. Oh, very good.
That would be
very good.
That would be a cool Civ type game to do something like that, like a turn of the last century sort of.
Yeah, and have like Tesla and have all that kind of definitely a different sort of thing. Yeah, for sure. Oh, I'm glad that you had so much fun chasing this dream of interstellar flight. I don't know. Maybe I'm just not self-motivated with this game enough. I guess there's probably a certain type of pleasure in it of like, okay, what are the different ways you can win this game? I'm going to try each of them. And I think that, back in the day, if I had bought this, when I was a kid, in 1991, when I was in college and I had no money, I was like, oh, this is the game I own now. Instead of I have far too many, I have one, I would have been doing all of this, right? I mean, that was definitely
an endless kind of game. Yeah, especially with all the difficulty levels. Yeah. And I'll talk about this more next episode, but that, with Civ 5, that is how I'm feeling right now. I have gotten the space victory there, but the game is polished enough compared to 3, which I have a lot of frustrations with 3, mainly because of its age more than it's really not their fault. They were still figuring out what to do. But like 5 is such a streamlined version of that, and it's very friendly. And there's like a lot of the frustrations and complaints we had in the last couple episodes, most of them are not there. So it's like, oh, this is very easy to slide into, and see the hours go away because it's so like, the friction isn't there, so then we'll be able to talk about it with Beyond Earth as well, because again, Beyond Earth is essentially, as far as I can tell, almost like a skin of 5. So the systems are very similar, but how they chose to simplify certain things, it'll be fun to talk about.
Yeah, cool. So that's going to be our bonus episode. We'll be talking about Beyond Earth, which I guess is what happens when Tim's ship gets off planet.
So the funny thing, because I did get the space race victory in 5 last night, they literally a very unceremonious win, by the way. Like when you win in Civ 5, that's the only complaint I have, is like just a screen comes up, it says you won. Like the cinematic, there's no, because the opening cinematic is quite good actually. But there's a button that says, do you want to, says something like quit to main menu. In Civ 5, they let you keep playing once somebody wins, so you can just kind of play forever. So keep playing or go to Beyond Earth. And if you press the Beyond Earth button, it literally opens up Steam to the page to buy Beyond Earth.
Oh, wow.
So it's like, so I literally, that's what I'm doing.
Have you played Loom?
Right, exactly. Yeah, so funny.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. Do you want to turn to takeaways? Are you ready to move on to that? Is there anything else you want to make sure you touch on?
I think that's about it. The one thing we talked about in pre-show that I'd wanted to clarify, we should have actually mentioned, has nothing to do with these stories. But when it comes to the lineage for the series and sort of the genesis of Civ and MicroProse back in the day, I hadn't done the research at the time and then found it later and had forgotten this, but Bruce Shelley was also one of the co-founders of MicroProse with Sid Meier, and they both worked on the first Civilization. I don't know when Bruce left, but for those who don't know, Bruce Shelley was one of the founders of Ensemble, which went on to make Age of Empires, and eventually was bought by Microsoft. But I wanted to call that out because I think that's significant. And then you added, Brett, that he was also a board game guy, designer before.
Yes. Yeah, I think he worked with, I think I had said Avalon Hill, a big board game company, especially in the 80s and 90s. I mean, that was, they actually had a game called Civilization, and MicroProse had to settle a suit with them about naming rights and things like that because it was completely unrelated.
I forgot. I forgot about that. I did know about
that was a whole thing. Yeah, there's always been kind of this weird space because you can't actually you can't copyright game mechanics. So it's hard to know what to fight over. So basically people end up fighting over names because there's not a lot you can fight over the expression of an idea as well. So if the art looks the same, right, you could argue for that. And if there's some other contractual stuff that's in place, you sometimes see that happening. But in general, the guts of the game are actually, you could go and make a Civilization clone, call it whatever you want, as long as it's not Civilization, and totally get away with it.
Well, and various people have left Firaxis, right? There's Shafer, his game finally came out, and then Soren Johnson's game.
Barbarian at the Gates. Soren's is pretty different in the sense that it's purely economics. It's not a military sim, and the victory conditions are different enough.
Oh, okay.
It's called Martian Trading Company.
Oh no, he mentioned he's working on one called 10 Crowns that is similar.
Oh yeah, he's working on something different now. But his first game was called Martian Trading Outpost or something like that.
Okay.
Which is a civ-like in the sense that it's multiple civilizations or multiple teams because it's all humans or whatever, not different. It's on Mars and it's economics purely.
It takes one side, one leg of it, and
exactly. Yeah, there's not a military aspect. For example, there's not a technical victory, I don't think. There's not wonders. It's about it's about economics, and apparently quite good. So, Brett here. The game's name is Offworld Trading Company. I regret the error. Anyway, let's turn then to, now that we mentioned Bruce Shelley, let's turn to our takeaways. Do you want to go first? I have a feeling we'll have one in common, but I think maybe only one. So why don't you go first, and I'll chime in.
Yeah, I only have two. There could be a lot of little ones, but I'm just going to kind of focus on two, maybe bigger ones and general ones. My first one, I don't know the best way to really encapsulate it in one sentence, but because of the stories I just told about how I ended up playing, I think a takeaway for me that I never really got to the point when playing these games in the past of understanding is how the spreadsheet really is present, or the series of spreadsheets, and I just never played enough of them in the past and never got good enough. And I'm still not good at them, but I never played enough to really win to a point where I could see that, I would always approach them in a very anxious way because I knew I was going to be overwhelmed, and they seem so complicated, and they still are complicated. But when you set a goal like I did and you try to fine tune everything you're doing toward that goal, you start seeing the numbers, and it really does kind of make, and this is going to sound like a negative, but it's not meant to be. It's more just meant to be descriptive, but it kind of makes the game very two-dimensional in a way, because there's just, that there's just numbers behind it, right? Calculated stuff. And it's just a sort of embellished visual version of that. And you're just fooling with those numbers, right? And I use that as a takeaway because in a way I'm kind of happily delighted that's the case, because like I said, I think in my head I always had made up this headcanon where these games were so crazy and complex that I would never be able to break through, but I was able to break through. And I like actually the fact that when it comes down to it, it is just a series of these interconnected sort of mathematical almost spreadsheets that are all connected in very interesting ways. Mm-hmm. And you can see the connections that they would have designed in there, but in a way, it kind of makes the game almost, once you break through and you realize that, it makes the game way more approachable too, because you kind of you start to understand how it all works, and, and Brett kind of was making the joke that all games are the same in some ways, and all games do start with math. And yes, that is true, but I don't really mean that. I just mean the way the systems work, the gameplay systems and how the simulation is working. And it kind of just gives me sort of, it heartens me that that's the case. Not that it's not as complicated as I thought it was, but that, it's a game for humans too,
Right. Sure. Yeah.
And it can be parsed, and sort of like, if anyone puts their mind to it and time into it, that they can succeed at something like this. And that was maybe more of a surprise than a takeaway, but it was interesting to kind of discover that.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that my first one, is linked to that. I just called it just balance. Because one of the things that this does really well is, despite the fact that there are, sort of misshapen nuggets and things like that, like the tech tree is not everything's equal weight, for example, right? You could see making the game easier to balance by making the trees maybe a little broader, a little different shaped or whatever, but every block being the same, or every building takes the same amount of time and therefore we balance a different way and things like that. This actually manages to find balance despite the fact that everything kind of has apparently unequal costs and benefits and et cetera, right? And that's how they maintain a lot of personality in the game, and yet kind of map to your sort of natural understanding as well as maintaining balance. So you get some benefit from a temple or whatever, but a temple takes twice as long as this other thing that you get a benefit from. So, they're balancing that way. And I think because they have these sort of layers of interlocking systems, like we talked about last time or the time before, that balance is achievable and understandable, and a game for humans, as you say, because they've made those choices. And it's really interesting, actually. It even further reinforces my thinking about this, hearing your story today of like gearing yourself entirely towards a particular type of victory, and understanding the trade-offs you're going to make to do that. Like, I'm going to choose Germany because I might have this problem. So I'm going to that's a reasonable thing to do. And you understand the systems and how they're balanced well enough to be able to make that decision, even if you ended up going with somebody else to actually achieve it. It's a reasonable supposition. And, it possibly would also depend on your initial conditions, whether Germany would have been the right choice anyway, right? Maybe you would have gotten the Romans in there and they would have been much more warlike or something like that, and you would have had to fend them off longer or something,
Yeah, for sure.
So it's possible it would have been the right choice in another game, right? So there's a lot of different things that tie into the balance equation. But I just love that it is as balanced as it is, and at the same time not kind of rote. I mean, that's years ago. You and I went to a talk by somebody from World of Warcraft at GDC. It was probably I don't know if it was Morheim, maybe. I don't know. It was
his name is escaping me. I know it.
Yeah.
Usually
you'll know who it is. Maybe it'll come to you. But and they were talking about how, rather than trying to balance stuff sort of in a generic numeric way, like, if we give them +1 to this, we have to give +1 to that. They just tried to make everything kind of cool. And rather than sort of try to nerf things all the time, I don't know if they've maintained this approach, but this thing is just totally different feel. that I'm trying to do this thing. It feels different, and it's balanced differently. Right? It just, the trade-offs are different.
Yeah.
And this sort of feels that way in sort of that chunky way that buildings are, or even how many turns something will take in the tech tree. I don't know. I appreciate the elegance of that, despite the fact that it doesn't necessarily appear elegant. I don't know. It's a weird thing to describe what I'm trying to capture, but that's the thing that I really take away from the systems.
It was Rob Pardo, by the way.
Pardo, that's who it was. Yes. Yep.
The balance is impressive, and I just, not having ever made anything remotely close to this as a developer, boggles my mind. This kind of game, making this kind of game, you know,
it's hard.
Yeah, I can imagine. So your second takeaway is kind of in a completely opposite direction. And I won't dwell on it too much because we already had some letters about this. But the other thing that I never thought that much about, and I'm, I guess guilty of not thinking about when I'd played these before. And again, this happens to me at least, I think probably both of us, but me specifically a lot on the podcast, because the podcast forces me to think about a game differently because we're playing it for the podcast. So we're looking into it differently and through different lenses and more deeply and for longer and et cetera, et cetera. So it's a little more academic in that way. At least that's how I choose to do it. It's still fun, but I like doing it that way. But I never really sat back and thought about the responsibility of the game. And we talked about this, so I won't dwell on it too much, but we talked about this in maybe the first episode. And there's a lot of, I hope this doesn't get too soapboxy, but there's a lot of, there's a lot of discourse around game development here and there about politics and about how people have opinions on whether politics should be in games or not be in games, or developers should be political or not, or whatever. And I think it's nearly impossible to not be political and to have some sort of stance on things. And I don't even think you should. That's my personal off the cuff opinion. And I guess it didn't dawn on me with Civilization specifically, when you are simulating all of civilization, how one-sided that really can be, because of again, probably not, it wasn't their intention. They're not being malicious or anything like that, but your perspective you're bringing to the game is inherently going to be biased from your own perspective. And when you're choosing to try to present all of civilization in a simulated game, there's a great responsibility to that, that it didn't dawn on me before, and as a takeaway, it's really like, I guess it's more of one of those moments when it makes me think, how responsible we really do need to be, especially if we're trying to simulate something as real as this game does. Now we talked about how tongue-in-cheek they try to be, and they're still having some fun here and there. But for me, even if you do that stuff, you still need to be thinking about what I'm talking about. And I won't dwell on it now, but I do want to bring it up next episode. There's some specific things they do in Civ 5 that all relate to Beyond Earth that, unfortunately, 10 years later, they're still not achieving what I'm saying. And in fact, maybe going in the wrong direction in a couple places. So I think they improve in some places, but then, tone deaf in some others. So
I look forward to that, because I definitely, it's one thing that I have seen people do is to dig in their heels and lean into the thing that's bad, or even just that they've gotten criticism for. I could see a Civ 4 that takes these kind of jokey personalities, the advertising, because maybe that was successful for them or whatever. Maybe they thought it was successful for them, and really leaning into that and going even further and being even jokier or even less respectful of historic personages. I think
Civ Revolution does some of that, right? They get more caricatured.
They do. Yeah, they do. They're very caricatured. And especially as Americans, right? I mean, and just like how ignorant we are of so much of the world. Like, I kind of said that in some defense, a few episodes ago in feedback, that like I just did not. A lot of stuff is abstracted to us, and we also don't want to talk about it, in our history classes when we're in school. And that's a real problem. I mean, because most of our textbooks are written either in California or in Texas, and depending on where you live, you get one or the other. These are just facts. And we also, education doesn't spend a lot of time on those things and helping kids think through these problems. And I don't know, there's just a lot of abstraction and like lack of real deep understanding. I don't want to go into all of that again, but I could totally see that going the wrong direction, or just in a direction that, I mean, I shouldn't say wrong. I should say just a direction I wouldn't be happy with. So I'm curious to see that.
Yeah.
My second one is emergence. One of the things that I think is really interesting, and one of my favorite stories, there've been a lot of good stories from your games, but starting World War I, or starting a world war, I should say, that really mirrors the causes of actual World War I in a lot of ways. I mean, the diplomatic arrangements and how there was just kind of this hodgepodge, and you had these weird relationships with these people on this other continent, and because you attacked this one, that meant over on the other continent, when somebody attacked you, that your ally over there needed to attack this other ally of them that attacked you, and like just how that all became a huge mess. Nobody programmed that. And I love how that emerges from the interlocking of the diplomatic systems. We've talked a lot about the way things emerge from a number of different sorts of things. For me, I had cases where, because I attacked someone, I ended up moving a lot of units out of a particular area, so they counterattacked into it. I basically would leave myself open, not realizing I was leaving myself open because I wasn't able to see that they had boats, for example, and could get to me. Because there's, so there's just different ways things could emerge of like, oh, well, you're going to take our little island, we're going to take your little peninsula, and things like that. And that's those are interesting exchanges, and you kind of like, you want to sue to get your city back and things like that. And none of that is coded directly. It sort of emerges out of the rules the rules and the pursuits of the AI. And I think that emergence and how it can reflect real history is really kind of interesting and a surprise for me. I did not expect you to start a world war. So I think that's pretty interesting. And yeah, I mean, those are super interesting things. I mean, it's almost something I would like to play more with and see what else would emerge. But I don't have the patience for it. So.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I hope we do get a guest on to talk about hopefully some of the AI stuff. And maybe we should, make a note to bring up emergence specifically to see how and if they did any sort of development to kind of create some of those, not necessarily those specific scenarios. Like you said, those are not intentionally not programmed at all. But did they do something with the AI to kind of create, conflict, or to create interesting sort of conundrums for the player, or not?
Right. Did they make rules that, for example, because you allied with this person, that there's a counter move alliance that happens somewhere else, right? That they didn't do it in order to allow a world war to break out, but they did it in a way to balance the field, right? That there would be other alliances in play once you started making them. It's to pick Dominion again. It's like, well, once somebody starts buying the high priced victory cards, everybody starts buying them, and so because you don't want to fall behind. And that's, I could see that being a strategy for building the AI. The AI is actually my other takeaway of just how good this is. I've never programmed a strategy game AI where you were playing competitively against an AI in a strategy game, and it is difficult. I know I've done some sort of toy stuff, and I mean, hats off to them across randomly created environments, and it's 5 or 6 or whatever levels of difficulty, and anywhere from 2 to 7 or 8 civs of different initial conditions of different kinds, like some personality or just sort of starting things that they wanted and things like that. I mean, that's a real achievement, and I think a long-term strength of the series, to be honest, that you can sit down and play this like that. You could sort of see, you could imagine at this point, this game particularly, Civ 3, that you might turn to multiplayer and not worry so much about your single player game anymore. But they stayed committed to that. I believe, stay committed to it to this day, to make that a important part of their game. Because it is something I think that audience expects for sure. So they may be kind of bound to do that. That doesn't make it any less impressive to me. So as an AI programmer, and seeing all these kind of, historically an AI programmer, seeing how good this is a real impressive thing to me, and something I want to call out. I don't know if I can take anything away from that personally, other than be good at your AI, but it's still really something to see. So that was a big deal for me.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, the difficulty definitely, I hope we get to ask somebody about that too, because the difficulty definitely has a huge impact on what the AI does, obviously. Because you can totally, even one difficulty level up that I dabbled with, I could see differences. So
yeah, and I'm curious to know how that
high level play.
Yeah, how is that structured?
Yeah.
Very curious. All right, cool. I'd like to do at least a little bit of our feedback. Maybe we won't do it all.
Yeah.
But before we hit letters, I actually had a review, so I thought I'd read that. Let me find that. This was through the podcast app. Where is it? Why is it showing me all of them ever? I just want the unread ones here. Thanks so much. Unread only. I don't know why that was off. This was from Annie Mitchell through the iTunes/podcast app. The subject was exemplary.
Whoa.
At first, when I began listening, I was naturally attracted by the nature of the content. This may come as no surprise, and there are many podcasts about all varieties of gaming. However, aside from the quality content, this podcast is unique from so many in how engaged and respected the listener feels while listening. Personally, I've come to respect Brett and Tim over the years, value their time-earned insights, and even see them as mentors. This review is long overdue, and I plan to be more involved from now on. Keep up the great work, guys.
Wow.
So thank you very much. That's very humbling. Yeah, you can hear Tim's very verbose response to that.
Wow.
Really very, very considered and erudite response. But no, that is really quite a compliment.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. That's well beyond anything that I thought we would ever hear about the podcast.
So I'm taking Tim's breath away there. Maybe we should turn to email. Will you be on firmer footing? I think I give you one from, let's see, is it Jesse?
Jesse is one I have.
Yeah. Read the one from Jesse, because I have one that I'll follow immediately with from Zach that touches on a sort of similar subject, and so we can kind of address that as a pair.
Okay.
Thanks again, Annie, by the way.
Yes, thank you so much. Kind words. So the subject is I Like It from Jesse. Hello. I wanted to write in with a little question, but first some praise. DGC makes commutes painless and workday fast and enjoyable. I stumbled upon your interview with John Romero and enjoyed it so much I thought I'd check out your Myst series. It brought me back to the harrowing night. One of my friends and myself decided to stay up until 5 a.m. beating it in one painful binge. By the time we finished, we had filled a whiteboard with nonsensical scribbles only we could understand. I've since listened to a handful of other series, both of games I've played and never got around to, all excellent. Thank you for all your insightful discussion and entertaining banter. Anyway, have you ever discussed doing special one-off indie episodes? So far, it seems like you normally cover influential early games and notable recent AAA games. I thought it might be fun to have discussions centered on more recent indie games with unique gameplay that may have influence going forward in the industry. I imagine they'd have to be distinct and relatively short. Something like Obra Dinn, Undertale, or Fez might provide interesting discussions and speculations. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to future episodes. Jesse. More kind words. Thank you, sir.
Yes. I also have one from Zach. Modern games is the subject. Hey, guys, thanks for the show. Longtime fan. At this point, I've been listening for a couple of years. Would you all be open? Zach must be from the South. Would you all be open to doing more episodes about modern games in the future? Your bonus episodes covering modern games have been some of my absolute favorites. I loved hearing your thoughts on Breath of the Wild, the new God of War, and Pokemon Let's Go. Most gaming podcasts talking about whatever new game comes out are from the perspective of journalists or fans. It's interesting and completely different for me to hear your opinions from the perspective of programmers and designers. He specifically suggests the Final Fantasy VII Remake. As a longtime JRPG fan, someone who spent his teenage years playing Final Fantasy, in the Final Fantasy IX episode, I liked hearing the struggles of a grown man essentially diving into the genre for the first time. I suspect Tim has never played the original Final Fantasy VII and probably won't before the new one comes out. It would be a great series of episodes to hear Tim's reaction to the new version of the game and both of your analysis of programming decisions as many of us play along together. Either way, thanks for your show over the years. So these were two that kind of touched on similar topics. Yeah. In terms of what we play. I mean, I'm open to it. It's not something we've talked a lot about because it is supposed to be sort of playing the classics or playing ones that are important in some way, and we can't always know that about things that just come out. But I am attracted to the idea of playing, I mean, either things indie that we think maybe have something to teach, the big games, or even just playing something recent and playing it for longer and talking over it like we do of these older games. Both are appealing, so it's something we'll probably take offline. But I don't know. What are your thoughts, sir?
Yeah, I think I have similar thoughts to what you just said. I'm open to it as well. I am. Probably as Brett would agree, I tend to be a little stubborn in sort of in the vision category because our vision for this was something specific that I tend to not always think outside the box beyond that and try to stay focused on what we're trying to do here. So, but for the podcast, we're just doing this for fun and on the side. So there's no need to, there's not a whole team waiting for us to get a vision going. And so, mixing it up from time to time doesn't seem like out of the question. And I would enjoy it. I mean, we both play modern games, and so there's plenty to talk about there. I guess my only hesitation might be that, it is enjoyable for me to play a modern game when I'm not playing for the podcast because I don't have to worry about the analysis of it. But as one I'm playing right now, boy, would I love to do a Death Stranding episode.
And that's what gives me pause, is that I might have to play Death Stranding.
Yeah, exactly. But I think specifically Jesse, sorry, I said thank you, sir, earlier. We don't know if they are a sir. Specifically with Jesse's suggestion as well with indie games, because I think indie games don't get enough airtime probably. And so some of the more popular ones like Oberdin definitely does. But it would be interesting, I think, to talk about, because I think we mentioned it from time to time on the podcast that indie games right now are really sort of like the games we're playing were back then. There's so much experimentation happening in genres. That's why we play these on the podcast from back then, because they were defining genres. And I think really, as we talk a lot about, the industry has kind of zeroed in on most of those genres by now, and indie games are the only ones trying to break those. So like film went through the same cycle. And so that would be a good reason to play some of them, because eventually the genres we're hitting are going to be, covered in previous series episodes. So
yeah. One thing, that I want to throw out there to be mindful of is that we are still professionals working in the industry. And
right.
One of the things that we're not crazy about individually is just, if we encountered something that we really reacted badly to, if we're doing that with our own personal time and free time, like I can remember a game from a creator that I really loved. And if I had been discussing on the podcast, when I got to a particular point, I would have been very upset and would have had a hard time discussing it in a respectful way. And I don't even want to talk about who it was or anything like that. It's not important. But that would be a hard conversation to have with something that just came out, considering where we are in the industry right now. So it's something to be mindful of.
No, and you reminded me, that was actually when we created the podcast way back when, 4 years ago.
Yep.
200 episodes ago. That was one of my main reasons, because I had I was at 343 at the time and stuff, and it's both respectful and also you just need to be careful when you're talking about your peers' work, that's coming out, especially the zeitgeist nature of our industry and kind of like the modern, or the recent discourse on something, and it changes over time, and playing older games, that discourse tends to simmer down and kind of find a lane. And when it's kind of hot, things like Death Stranding's a good example. Like, things changed when that game had come out. Things were changing week by week, about how people would talk about it. So it's a, not necessarily, I don't want to say it's a minefield, but it's trickier, and it was a way for us to sort of avoid that trickiness for our own sake. So neither of us are at a specific company right now. So, but we may be.
It's a little easier, but it's still the case that you worry about. We're picking games that we know are important in some way, and like you said, how we choose them is these established genres, or sold really well, or clear has clear descendants, or just games that we really loved. And so it's a lot easier for us to look at those, whereas with a new game, we don't know what we're going to encounter, and it's a little more daunting. But we could look at something that's recent but not up to the moment, at some point, so that's another thing to consider. It's like, well, okay, maybe something in the last couple of years instead of something that came out in the last couple of months might be a good fit for us. So it's something we'll continue to talk about. I'm sure while Tim is hiking the PCT, he's every day just going to be spending hours thinking about what to do with the podcast, and he'll be jotting down notes on, I don't know, bits of bark and stuff carved into it with a penknife or something. What do you do out there? Or something. I don't know what he'll do, but I'm sure he'll come back with all sorts of ideas.
I don't know. We'll see. You walk. That's what you do.
You walk and you complain about your feet hurting and all the weight you're carrying.
Yeah. Well, I'm gotten my pack down pretty good now, but not too much weight.
You got to carry all that food, man.
That's true. In certain stretches.
A lot of ramen.
Yeah. The popular meal, ramen.
It's all ramen on the trail. That's what I've heard. All right. Well, let's call it there. We do have other feedback that we'd like to get to. Thank you for sending that to devgameclub@gmail.com. We will catch up with more of it next week. We'll be doing as we mentioned earlier, a bonus episode on Beyond Earth, which I'm hearing from Tim is based on the Civ 5 engine, and is sort of a spiritual successor as well to Sid Meier's Alpha Centauri.
Yeah, for sure. You can totally see.
Yeah,
it'd be interesting to hear you jump into that. I think it'll be a fun sort of fork in the road, because it is space related, and you won't have the 5 comparison like I do, so you probably won't see the skinning, so to speak, of it, because it's I remember when, anyway, I don't want to jump into next episode, but it'll be fun to play. I think if memory serves, Beyond Earth was like 2 or 3 years after 5, so at this point it will have been like 13 years or so, or 12 years after 3. So quite a, they've innovated and polished and done quite a bit, but
and transition to 3D as well, right?
Yep. Yep, that's a biggie. I was actually looking at screenshots from 4.
I think 4 was where they made the transition.
Yeah, but I couldn't tell. I think so. This one is very, I think this was the full, I think 5 was the full, they also went to hexes, and so we'll talk.
Yeah, I think 5 is where they went to hexes, and that was a big change there. But 4 was, I think, the shift to 3D.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, so it'll be fun to talk about how they evolved things compared to 3, because I feel like 3, because we didn't play 1 and 2, so I can't say this with confidence, but I feel like 3 is still in the sort of like phase 1, sort of era of what civilization as a franchise means, and then starting with at least 5, maybe with 4 too. They start modernizing, I guess I'll say, and start streamlining certain things that I know we talked about on the previous episodes as being frustrating. So it'll be interesting to talk about that.
Yeah, interesting. I'm particularly curious about, one of the things we talked about in the first episode or two, as far as approaching something that is fantasy, broadly speaking. Science fiction is a subsection of fantasy, and how that changes the presentation of topics, subjects, trees, technologies, etc. I'm very curious about whether that's more inviting to me or less. Like, I'm very curious about that.
Me too.
So that'll be really interesting to me, and I look forward to both the experience and talking about it. Also, next episode is our 200th episode.
Yes.
200th by our numbering. I'm sure with some bonus episodes in there, it's more than that. But like, who's counting? Oh, well, we're counting, but we're not really counting, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But next episode will be the one we call 200. So we'll have made it to 200. Thank you all for coming along on this journey with us.
We do. Yes. Thank you so much. We do have a little bit of a special event happening during that episode that Brett isn't fully aware of. So stay tuned for that. Come back and listen. I'm excited about that, to plug it a little bit in a mysterious way. In addition to talking about Beyond Earth. So we'll kind of combo it up. Probably half of it will be Beyond Earth, and then half of it will be celebrating 200.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, sir. I guess, we've talked about what we're doing next time, so it's just where you can find us. You can find the web address of the podcast at devgameclub.com, where all the show notes are archived, as well as all the shows, of course, and also lists of everything we've played. You can find the podcast on Twitter at devgameclub, where you can also find my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
I am winding down on Persona 5. I think I've reached the last dozen hours or so of a very, very long game. And I've been playing that on twitch.tv/Brett Duville. You can find me there most weeknights playing for a few hours, around 5 to 8 Eastern. And on the weekends, I tend to go a little bit longer, maybe 4 or 5 hours. So you can find me there. I may play Beyond Earth on that stream on the weekend. I haven't decided. It doesn't always fit as well with me. I'm a little bit more daunted by playing a strategy game on stream because it takes a lot more of my concentration. So, whatever.
That'd be nerve-wracking.
It is a little nerve-wracking. I played Civ 3 that way, and I was the very beginning of my very first game, and being like, I had the manual open. I was trying to read. It was a very overwhelming experience. So I did not end up streaming any more Civ 3. So I point out that I'm getting to the end of Persona 5 because we're drawing close to the next game, and I'm letting people come to the channel vote either for Prey 2017 or Spider-Man 2018 as my next game.
Wow, that's it's both good choices.
I know. I mean, I'll play both of these games at some point, but you can determine what I'm streaming next. Come and vote. I'm keeping track of who votes for what, so you only get to vote once. But you, Tim, could come by and
I know. If you play Prey, I might come to join you on that stream.
I know. I'd have to finish it before April 22nd, but we shall see how that goes. Anyway, thanks so much for joining us this week, and have fun playing games. Good night.
Good night.